The power of today's media. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Listen to this headline from Pew Research, February of this year. A majority of Americans express low confidence in journalists who act in public's best interests. That means not too many Americans today believe the media are looking out for them. I think there's a lot of truth to that. President Donald Trump was the one that came out strong during his first administration, talking about fake news, fake news, fake news, and of course, plaguing him throughout his first term in the White House was the fake news Russia collusion hoax, right? So if anybody has cause to call out the media for its lies and deceptions and spin and outright bias, it would be President Donald Trump. But Americans aren't ignorant to that, right? Americans aren't too stupid to realize the media in general aren't really looking out for the public interest so much as, I don't know, their corporate interests or perhaps their political interests. Everybody and anybody knows the media largely lean left. They don't like to admit it. They call themselves independents. Previous Pew polls have shown that journalists, by and large, check the independent box when it comes time to characterizing their political leanings. They say they're not Democrat. They say they're not Republican. They say they're independent-minded. But you start asking them questions. Well, where do you stand on abortion? Where do you stand on foreign policy? Where do you stand on MAGA and MAHA and this White House administration? And 99.99% of them give the Democrat talking point for an answer. So yeah, they claim to be independent and independent-minded and unbiased and all that, but dig just a little deeper, just a tiny bit, peel just a tiny thin layer back and ask a couple questions. And that's what it is. The media, by and large, lean left. But worse than that, worse than leaning left is a media that pretends to be doing the good business of watchdogging on behalf of the American people. But really, they're not. They're undercutting the American people by delivering untruths, right? To put a nice spin on it. They're delivering lies and deceptions. They're delivering anything but the truth to the American people. And that's why, to circle back to this Pew Research Center poll posted February of this year, a majority of Americans, or 57%, express low confidence in journalists to act in the best interests of the public. Before I get into more of this, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, and I know you do, but if you like Bold and Blunt, then you may subscribe to Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at washingtontimes.com, where if you scroll to the bottom of the main washingtontimes.com page and find the newsletter section, click on it and find my newsletter, Best of Cheryl Chumley. Put your email address in to subscribe to my newsletter, and you'll get delivered to your email box Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. My commentaries, my Bold and Blunt audio versions, and my weekly Bold and Blunt video versions as well. You don't have to go search for them. They'll be right there. Right there. You don't even have to get up from your chair. You may also get Bold and Blunt, of course, wherever podcasts are available. All right, let's look a little deeper at this survey because it's interesting. Majority of U.S. adults say they have low confidence in journalists to act in the public's best interest. Well, isn't that kind of the mission statement of journalism, right? That you're supposed to act in the best interests of the public. Specifically, that you're supposed to root out the truths. Even more specifically, you're supposed to watchdog those in America who might be, for whatever reason, for whatever personal reason or personal agenda, working against the interests of the American people. And we're not talking just China, right? We're not talking just international forces, we're talking domestic enemies as well. Or we're talking domestically, not enemies, but just those who have purposes that run counter to what might be best for the individual American citizen. Like, I don't know, the government, right? Because the government is a collective body, and its purpose is supposed to be to defend the interests, again, of the Constitution, meaning the individual American citizens. But oftentimes, especially when Democrats are in charge, we find out that the government is more often than not representing the interests of socialists and communists and Marxists and globalists and Chinese interests and whoever else can give the Democrats who are in charge their next funding stream so they can stay in power. So it's supposed to be the job of the media to watchdog all this stuff and not just take the talking points from the politicians, write them up or read them over the airways and pretend like they've done their job. You know, personally speaking, I've known many instances of reporters just taking a press release that have come across their desk from some political body. They rewrite it, they quote something on the press release, and they pass that off as unbiased news. You know, it's a little bit lazy. It's a little bit biased, but you know, this passes for journalism quite frequently these days. And what also passes for journalism are journalists who pretend like they're watchdogging. They're out there digging. They're digging hard. They're leaving no source unturned, right? No stone unturned in their search for the truth and finding all the source material they can, including sources who will speak and sources who have written things and recorded things and put things in archives that have to be dug out using Freedom of Information Act or sunshine laws and all that. And, you know, reporters who do that and then come out and just report something that is so counter to Americans' interests, right? They pretend like they're doing a good watchdogging job, but they only do it at certain moments. They only do it, for instance, when a Republican is in the White House, a Republican that, say, for instance, they detest, a Republican like, oh, I don't know, say, for instance, again, President Donald Trump, right? All of a sudden, the world of media is alive and thriving with watchdog reporters, real pit bulls that just want to talk about the Constitution and sometimes even the Bible, right? And founding roots. And all of a sudden they're history experts. They know the founding fathers and what they believed and said and wanted. And they talk about the tyranny of this administration and the dictatorial leanings of this White House. And Trump, all of a sudden they know all about the 25th Amendment and Trump has to be impeached, and they can come up with all kinds of legal ways using legal jargon and just all types of legal citations to justify that Trump must be impeached. But when it's Barack Obama in the White House, oh boy, he could do no wrong, right? And Joe Biden couldn't string a sentence together, right, without having to get dope slapped a few times behind the curtain. And then even when he was given cue cards to read, he would read the directions on the cue card. Smile here, Joe. And he would read that. Or look to your left, Joe. Call on CBS reporter, blah, blah, blah. And then he would do it after reading it out loud. So we all knew where he was going with his next move. And the media like to pretend like, oh, that's just Joe. That's just silly old Joe. You know, he's a little gaff. He's a little gaffy today. It's just a little stumbling block. They never wanted to dig deep into his medical records. They never wanted to dig deep into the forces behind the scenes in the White House that were pulling Joe Biden's puppet strings, even though it was obvious he was the Weekend at Bernie's guy, right, being dragged around by handlers. And, you know, media media members ought to have known during the campaign season when Joe Biden refused to come out of his basement and he had to sit side by side with his wife, Jill, to give any kind of interviews at all. And the reason he had to sit side by side with her is that she had to keep elbowing him to wake him up. Like, wake up, Joe, wake up, wake up. 3 more minutes to ice cream. 2 more minutes to Baskin Robbins, Joe. The media didn't bother to dig up any type of negative stories then. They waited until Joe Biden's last days in the White House, or they waited until it was evident that Joe Biden wasn't going to be seeking a second term because he was basically tossed out by members of his own party. And then they started looking at the history and they started scratching their heads and going, maybe Joe Biden had some mental issues after all. But with Donald Trump, all of a sudden the media were experts in analyzing and psychoanalyzing long distance, right? They knew Donald Trump's inner workings. They knew his psychological makeup. They were certain that this guy wasn't mentally all there, that he was unfit for the office. He was, as I think it was Mitt Romney, a circus show, a circus act, and didn't belong. So it's just interesting to me when the media chooses to do its watchdogging duty and when the media chooses not to do its watchdogging duty. And that is why the majority of U.S. adults, 57%, say they have low confidence in journalists to act in the best interests of the public. You know, there are other polls out there a couple months before this February one, well, a few months, October 2nd, 2025, Gallup reported trust in media at new low of 28% in the United States. Pew also had a poll back in 2025, October 29th, how Americans trust in information from news organizations and social media sites have changed over time. Specifically, Pew reported then trust in information from national, local news media has declined among Republicans and Democrats. And you know what? To that Gallup and Pew survey showing that trust in media in general among U.S. adults has declined over the years, I say, hurrah, right? Because we're supposed to, as American individual citizens, we're supposed to regard our government with a certain level of suspicion. We're not supposed to just openly embrace everything that our politicians tell us. And as extensions of what our politicians are telling us, as the carriers of the politicians' messengers, the media gets grouped into that sort of camp that we as American individuals are supposed to regard with suspicion as well. Think of our founding father days. Think of how colonists regarded Britain. Think how colonists regarded the formation of their new government. Think how founding fathers just questioned and debated and argued each other over how the government should be run so that individuals would be in the best position to maintain their God-given individual liberties and rights against a government that they knew from experience was just naturally prone to growing and becoming a huge bloated bureaucracy that would then strip individuals of their God-given rights and liberties, right? So suspicion against authority is sort of ingrained in America's DNA. And we're supposed to carry that. So I see these surveys, Americans' trust in journalists is at all-time lows of 28% or whatever the number was in this recent poll. I think it was 28%. And then I see this newer one, this one in February, that most Americans don't trust the media to report on items that benefit the American citizen, on issues that represent the public's best interests. I see that as kind of good news. That's how we're supposed to be. At the same time, as a member of the media, It kind of stinks, right? Because the media is supposed to be above all this partisan bickering and supposed to be out there doing the hard work of digging for truths on behalf of the American individual. And sad to say, too many in the media don't, too many in the media aren't, and too many in the media will not, no matter what polls show, no matter how much shaming goes on well into the future. And I have with me today a guest who's going to speak more to the power of the media and how it's shaping certain stories right now as we speak. If you don't do more as an individual than flip on some news show and catch your 30 seconds of headlines on news, or just scroll down a social media site 5 minutes a day, then you're not informed. You have to check and recheck and check several different sources in order to get even a glimpse of what is actually truth out there. Better yet, in this day and age of internet, right? You can go directly to the source. If you want to know what President Donald Trump says about something, go right to Truth Social and read what he posts himself, or go to the official White House government website and read what Carolyn Leavitt said at a certain press conference, or what President Trump is saying. Go right to these government websites and you can see what they put out by way of statements, unfiltered, instead of waiting for CNN or MS Now or whomever to report sort of their own tailored version of what is said. That being said, my guest today, again, is here to discuss how the powerful media is shaping today's events and breaking news. Marc Lotter, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. So great to have you here.
It's great to be on your show, Cheryl.
Yeah, it's different from when I'm normally on your show. You are co-host of Wake Up America on Newsmax, but you are also the former special assistant to President Donald Trump, so you have some inside political knowledge. I want to talk to you today, though, about current events through the eyes of the media. What has been your experiences in media, just to give listeners a quick rundown of where you started and where you are now in media?
Yeah, well, I mean, being in the media was actually my dream since I was a young child. Went to school with a double major in political science and broadcast journalism. Spent the first 15 years of my life out of college in a television newsroom behind the scenes as a producer, executive producer, acting news director at local stations around primarily the Midwest and the South. Before going into politics, spending 20 years in politics, state, local, eventually the White House, three presidential campaigns, and now back into the media as of about a year and a half ago with Newsmax as the co-anchor of Wake Up America.
Wow, you are even a more informed guest on this issue than I anticipated. That's such a great background. Look, when you look around at news coverage in America right now, I know that you've seen some changes. You've been in it for years. So have I. And it just seems like that old-timey who, what, where, when, why, sometimes how sort of formula has gone by the wayside. Much more opinionated. What are you seeing?
Yeah, and I've often referred to it as a de-evolution of our media because, as I'm sure you know, Cheryl, back in the day, 250 years ago when our country was founded, the media was partisan. You literally had Abraham Lincoln and his allies go out and buy newspapers and little community newspapers to get the word out. The political parties operated the media. In fact, back in my home state of Indiana, you still have a newspaper called the Rushville Republican, and you have the Corridon Democrat. It's in their banner. Now, I'm not saying that that's what their political leanings are, but that's the vestige of what we used to see. Now, we went through a bipartisan kind of the fourth estate view of the press. And now here in the last 15, 20 years or so, I would say, we've really seen the de-evolution to where our press is becoming very partisan. And people are choosing their media based on their personal beliefs.
But you know what? It's not the partisanship that is so much problematic, because you're right. There was that whole thing of yellow journalism, and our nation has had this back and forth. Is media supposed to be unbiased, or is it okay to be biased? It's the hidden nature of it. It's the MSNBCs out there that say we are not biased. That's the problem, correct?
Absolutely. And, we see it in so many areas. And it's not just, what maybe some of the casual folks at home think, where it's like, oh, you only see a Republican or a Democrat on the air, and they're nice to one side, but they're mean to the other side. There is that, of course. And we do see that with MS Now, the old MSNBC. You still see that in CNN. But what's even worse, I fear, is how they're even choosing to not cover the news. And so when you see the murder of a young woman in Chicago by an illegal immigrant gets barely, if any, coverage by the legacy media, it's because it doesn't fit their narrative. When there is greater outrage that there is a mural put up for Irina Zarutska, the woman who was killed by the illegal immigrant in Charlotte. There's more outrage about a mural to her than there was about the fact that this crazed man killed that young woman for doing nothing other than riding on a train. That shows you the level of partisanship and how it rears its ugly head, because the mainstream media didn't cover the Irina Zarutska murder as much as they're covering a protest now over the fact that a mural was put up in honor of her.
Yeah, and it seems to me the border has been really subjected to just drumbeat after drumbeat of media bias. Anytime there's a crime committed by an illegal, either the media blot it out completely, ignore it, or they fail to identify the person as illegal. Too many media outlets, I should say.
No, absolutely, and it's really remarkable because how many times, and we do it all the time on Newsmax. I know other conservatives do this, outlets do the same thing. We're playing the sound bites of Chuck Schumer from maybe just 10, 15 years ago, where he's talking about the need to deal with illegal immigration, or Bill Clinton, or Barack Obama even saying, how we had to deal with the problem at the border. I mean, Obama was known as the deporter in chief, and yet it was okay. And now, flash forward, they're completely on the opposite, and no one is even calling them out for this bold shift in their narrative, where they went from "we need secure borders" to now open borders and anyone and everyone is welcome here, whether you're illegal or not.
There's another issue that seems to me has been really lopsided in coverage, and that's the Abraham Accords. Had it been Barack Obama who had forged those accords, I'm sure we would be talking about it today, nonstop in the news. But since it was Trump, it's just radio silence.
It really is remarkable. He would have gotten another Nobel Prize, maybe one he actually deserved, if he actually had done the Abraham Accords. But when you look at this, and you look at what this is about, and it's not just here in the United States. Look at the leaders in Canada, over in Europe, where they just rail against Trump. Anything that Trump does, even though later down the road they usually admit, yeah, we should have listened to him. Take Germany, for instance, when President Trump was very difficult in the first administration over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, telling Germany, do not rely on Russian gas and oil. They did it anyway. Then all of a sudden, with Ukraine and everything, it came back to haunt them. And then later down the road, they admit, well, Trump was probably right. But the liberal establishment, I don't even necessarily mean like political liberal, but that's what that is over there. It's just so reflexive against anything and everything that Donald Trump does. I mean, even take a look at the Iran war right now. If it had been Barack Obama or George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush that had done this, it would have been part of American foreign policy, because we've been talking about how bad Iran is for 47 years. And every president has talked about how we need to stop them, how we need to keep them from getting a nuclear weapon. Donald Trump finally does something about it, and they call it a war crime.
Yeah, and isn't it funny how all of a sudden the media have an interest in things like the War Powers Act and debating that, when under Barack Obama, when under even Bill Clinton, the War Powers Act was one of the greatest inventions out there to give commander-in-chiefs the ability to react in real time to hostile forces against America.
And this is, again, an example of the bias in the media. They don't tell you that every president since 1972, when the War Powers Act was passed and passed over a veto by then President Richard Nixon, every administration, regardless of party, has viewed the War Powers Act as being unconstitutional. And that if they would have had a question about it, if Republicans would have questioned whether Barack Obama had the ability to go in and take out Osama bin Laden, or to intervene in Syria, or we would have basically been called un-American, and everyone would have said how the War Powers Act many is viewed as unconstitutional. When Democrats do it against Donald Trump, they're standing up for democracy.
And let's, before we get into a news item that's unfolding, Eric Swalwell, I kind of wanted to peel back the layers there and explore how the media is treating that story with you. But before we get into that, what's your take on why? Because you have been in media serving side by side in the newsroom with liberals, with conservatives, with people you don't even know their political leanings. But why is the media like this? Is it because they're lazy? Is it because they're uninformed? Do they hate America?
Well, I honestly think it's because they are headquartered out of liberal New York City and Washington, D.C. I was reading a great book, and I used to do this, and I have done it generally except in recent years. I've read every book of every White House press secretary that's written one. And I remember Marlin Fitzwater, the legendary, historic White House press secretary under two presidents, the only one to ever do it, under Reagan and Bush, the first Bush. He wrote about how liberal the media was and how he was having to confront the liberal media bias. I think it's personally because of the one fundamental difference between Donald Trump and everyone else. I think there's always been this general understanding, and I'll use a football analogy, that the presidents of the United States are going to stay within the 40-yard lines. Might be 40 yards, the 40-yard line to the left or the 40-yard line to the right, but they're still going to always be moving down that roughly the middle of the field. And Donald Trump just doesn't care. And if something needs to be done, he's going to do it. It doesn't actually matter if it's to the left or to the right. He literally views every problem. I've served with him. I've spent a lot of time with him over the years during the first couple of years in the administration, the first campaign, the second campaign. And Donald Trump just sees a problem and he wants to get it fixed. He's a builder. Hold my Diet Coke. I'm going to go get this done. Why hasn't this been done before? And if you were ever in a policy discussion with him behind closed doors, and if your answer was, well, no one's ever done that, sir. No one's never tried that, sir. He would basically be almost like, hold my Diet Coke, I'm going to go do it right now. And because that's the way he actually views of getting things done as being a sign of success. Building a building. You're not a good builder if you don't build a building. And I think too many other presidents viewed success of being, can I get through my 8 years, or can I get reelected? Can I not be impeached? Can the world still be spinning and we're not at war when I'm done? Right. I don't necessarily want to solve anything, maybe a few things here and there, but I just want to keep the job.
So basically, those who are effective and competent get punished by the media. That's basically what you're describing.
And even the electorate, to a certain extent, I would say. How many presidents? I think all presidents in their second term have a significant decline in popularity. Not necessarily because people are tiring of them, which I think there is some of that. But I also think it's then where they don't have to worry about re-election again. So that's when you're going to get George W. Bush trying to actually fix the broken Social Security system.
Right.
That's where you're going to get Barack Obama trying to do, his Green Raw Deal and all those other energy plans. Most of the time, those major initiatives, you're going to get it during the first 2 years, and then you're going to get it in the last term. And aside from that, you don't really try to do anything except what you have to get done.
So let's just finish up with talking about Eric Swalwell and what's breaking in the news right now. The Democrat leadership actually turned against him. But, it's been a whispered secret about his sexual misconduct for a long time. Same as with Anthony Weiner, right? Who for a very long time carried a reputation of sexual misconduct, but little was done in the media to report on it. What's going on in the media that you see with the ongoing breaking coverage of Eric Swalwell? Are you happy with it?
Well, I'm surprised by how quickly it has happened. It reminds me, not the similar circumstances. So please, I am not trying to equate circumstances, but how quickly the presidential campaigns in 2020 died off, and Joe Biden was basically anointed to become the candidate because they didn't have a choice. It was for me, I believe it's a political matter. Yeah. They could not have Eric Swalwell be the nominee for governor of California because the Republican would unload all of this stuff. It would come out, and then they would have a Republican governor. They also couldn't run the risk of having the top two nominees in their jungle primary be Republicans, because Democrats are feeding upon themselves. So there was one aspect of it, very similar to how the Democrat Party couldn't have Bernie Sanders in 2020. And so they had to do something and basically decide, well, Joe Biden is the only other viable candidate left. And so they basically had to do this. So that's the timing of it. And I think it's unfortunately a dirty little secret of Washington, D.C. And I don't think it's just the media. I think it's politics. You know, yes, it's unsavory. Yes, it's unseemly. And until it becomes a problem for me or my party, I'm not going to do anything about it. I mean, we've had the same thing. You talked about Anthony Weiner. There were same rumbles about Matt Gaetz over the years. Yeah. There have been similar rumbles about others, over those years. And you don't do anything about it until it becomes a problem. I will give, even though it was not necessarily handled well, where the Republicans dealt with the George Santos issue, and there was political cost to that. They lost one seat of their majority. Right now, I have a feeling what's going to happen if I were a betting man is that you're going to get Eric Swalwell, but there's also going to be a Republican that goes down with it. So whether that is Corey Mills, whether that is Tony Gonzalez, who all have their own issues and, obviously that they're all facing. So then there will not be a change in majority or change in the margins. The leaders will come together and say, great, I'll give you mine, you give me yours, we'll clean house. And then we'll pat ourselves on the back for how great we're doing.
Oh, it's such a tiresome game sometimes.
Yes.
But last quick question, Mark. Would you recommend, or anyone out there listening and hoping for a career in media, is that something that you would recommend? And if so, with what caveats?
Absolutely, I would. Now, I took a very, indirect path back into the media and living my dream, but I do think it's very important. The one thing I would act as a caveat is to have people, and this will offend current journalism professors, but ask yourself why you're wanting to do this. Are you wanting to do this to change society? Are you wanting to do this to fight on behalf of the little guy? Because if you want to be an activist, that's not what you're supposed to be. You're actually supposed to be out there trying to find the facts, to find the truth, whether it is in favor of the majority in the community or the minority, on behalf of the little guy, or the little guy's the one who is part of the problem. Right now, I think we have too many out there that are seeking to be like activist journalists rather than going out there and letting the facts tell you where they go.
Oh, I so agree. And more than activist, celebrity, right? Look at me, and I want to be a star in the media.
And the funny thing I would tell you, and you may be the same way, Cheryl, I don't know. I used to joke with this. I'm not going to name names, but it was a very well-placed and very well-sourced New York Times reporter, who we would all know her name, but literally told me, she never would have imagined spending more time on television than she is in front of a computer screen or a typewriter, actually writing newspaper articles for a great newspaper. She's spending more time on television talking about those kinds of things because that's the way the industry goes these days.
That's the nature of today's beast. Absolutely. And, I'm glad to have you on the news, though, on TV news, because I do enjoy watching you and Charla in the mornings. Thank you so much, Marc Lotter, Newsmax, for being on Bold and Blunt. Great to chat.
Yeah, great to have you on our show as well, and thanks for having me.
All right. And that's another Bold and Blunt. Remember, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com, at Real Life Network, and wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. In the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.